Prince William did not go to Highgrove this past Friday, and everyone who follows this family closely noticed the absence immediately. Harry went, Meghan went, Archie went, Lilibet went. King Charles opened the door of his private Gloucestershire home to the family his own heir has spent years refusing to sit in a room with. That is not a coincidence. That is a message. And to understand why one quiet afternoon at a private Gloucestershire estate is being treated as a genuinely significant national event, you have to remember exactly how far this particular family fell before this moment could even become possible.
Prince Harry. Let's give him a round of applause. At last, he has taken his children to see their granddad.
An Oprah interview that accused the institution, in front of an audience of tens of millions, of specific and genuinely serious wrongdoing. A Netflix series that pulled back curtains the palace had spent decades keeping shut. A memoir that described William physically knocking his brother to the floor during an argument about Meghan. A memoir Harry has since said, publicly and repeatedly, that he stands behind completely, that his conscience on it is clear. 6 full years of silence, distance, and carefully worded non-statements from both sides followed all of that, with almost no genuine public movement in between. Against that specific backdrop, a quiet family dinner in Gloucestershire is not a small gesture. It is one of the largest signals this family has sent in half a decade, and everyone involved knows exactly what it means.
Because for years we heard that the obstacle that was standing between Harry, Meghan, and these children was the UK thing around security. It just wasn't going to be safe. What changed?
No photographers were allowed anywhere near the inside of Highgrove. No official picture was ever released to any outlet. Buckingham Palace described the entire event, when finally pressed, in exactly 4 carefully chosen words: a private family occasion. And those 4 words are doing the work of an entire press strategy on their own. But you do not need a photograph to understand what actually happened inside that house on Friday afternoon. A grandfather saw grandchildren he had not held in 4 years. A father sat across from a son he has reportedly spent a decade quietly trying to win back. And the one person missing from that room is exactly where I want to start. Charles has spent months, by every account currently leaking out of that palace in careful, deliberate fragments, pushing specifically and persistently for this exact moment to happen.
There isn't a laundry in the cosmos big enough to wash all the dirty linen he has aired about his own family. For him to complain about his privacy being invaded takes not just the biscuit, but the whole tin.
He is described by multiple separate sources as bending over backwards for Harry in ways that would have been unthinkable even a year ago, clearing his diary specifically around the visit, softening the terms of a genuinely brutal and long-running security dispute that has followed this family since 2020, reportedly even offering rooms inside Buckingham Palace itself for the visit at one earlier stage of the planning. A king currently managing an active cancer diagnosis, a king with a limited and genuinely uncertain number of these particular afternoons left to spend, however he chooses to spend them, chose to spend one of them on healing, or at least attempting to heal. The relationship with the son who wrote 400 pages publicly tearing the family apart for an international audience of millions. That is either the single bravest thing Charles has done since he first took the crown, or the single most reckless decision of his entire reign so far. I genuinely cannot decide which one it actually is, and I strongly suspect the people standing closest to this situation, inside the palace itself, right now, cannot fully decide either.
With the award, and as it was handed over to William and his teammates, when one of the players nearly dropped the award, and William and Catherine, they just laughed it off. It was a lighthearted moment, but it was so nice to see so much PDA from them during this match, because they are coming out so strong amongst all the controversies that we're seeing that are happening right now with Harry and Meghan and the children visiting with the king.
No matter how confidently they might present it in briefings, William, according to the multiple sources now circulating around every corner of this story, is not handling any of it well. One insider describes him as unable to contain his resentment specifically where the Sussexes are concerned, a resentment that has apparently only intensified rather than faded across the years of separation. Another source says that watching his own father roll out the welcome mat amounts to William's actual worst nightmare, playing out in real time, inside his own family's private house, entirely without his permission and entirely without his blessing. A third source, and this is the detail that has generated the most discussion since it emerged, puts it even more plainly.
That have married into their family, for example, or even a family member because they want to see the rest of the family if there's children involved. I've seen this happen where grandparents have to put up with a daughter or son's spouse because they know that if they say anything, they will not get to see their grandchildren.
Charles has reportedly started describing his own heir's attitude in private conversation as petulant. Petulant. That is the specific word a reigning king allegedly used to describe the man who will one day wear his own crown, inherit his own throne, and make exactly these kinds of decisions himself without his father's input. If that particular word landed for you the way it landed for a lot of people following this story closely, it is worth sitting with for a moment. Because a king privately describing his heir's behavior as childish is not a small thing to leak, whether accidentally or deliberately, into public circulation.
Everyone is asking the same question. What changed? Because for years we heard that the obstacle that was standing between Harry, Meghan, and these children was the UK thing around security. It just wasn't going to be safe. And Harry said that he could not bring his family back without the protection that he actually felt was necessary.
Stay with me, because the split screen this weekend produced tells you considerably more than any single official statement from either camp ever could. And I want you to hold both images in your head simultaneously. On one side of England, Harry, Meghan, and 2 children who had not set foot on royal soil together as a family in 4 full years, slipping quietly into a private estate with no press presence, no advance announcement, no public warning at all until the entire visit was already finished and safely concluded. On the other side of the exact same country, on the exact same afternoon, William in full, deliberate public view at a charity polo match, Catherine seated beside him, cameras rolling freely, doing the one thing he has always done more reliably and more consistently than his brother, showing up exactly where he is expected to be and conspicuously nowhere he has not personally chosen to be. And here is the irony that nobody inside that family seems willing to say out loud, even though it is sitting right there in plain sight for anyone paying attention. William spent years, quietly and not so quietly, accusing Harry of turning royal life into a performance stage specifically for an audience that was never supposed to see behind the palace curtain in the first place.
So there is this guilt that Charles, I think, feels with Harry, that he tries to, I think, play into Harry's woes, okay? And now we have Harry with his children, and then there is this desire for, I think, the king to want to feed into this relationship to help repair it, because Harry, I believe, has put a big guilt trip on his father. But then you have the public who are looking at this and saying, well, you know, we remember all of the interviews.
And yet, on the exact weekend his own father was quietly and privately reuniting with his estranged son and grandchildren behind firmly closed doors, William chose the most public, the most heavily photographed, the most conventionally and visibly royal setting available to him anywhere in the country. 2 brothers, 2 separate Fridays, 2 completely different and deliberately contrasting messages sent to the exact same watching public on the exact same afternoon, without either one of them needing to say a single public word directly about the other. Let's be honest about what actually happened underneath all of the palace's careful, deliberately minimal language, because I think the emotional core of this particular story deserves to be named plainly rather than buried under speculation about strategy. This was the first time Charles had seen Archie and Lilibet in person since they were toddlers at their great-grandmother's Platinum Jubilee celebrations. Archie is 7 years old now. Lilibet is 5. An entire meaningful, formative chapter of these 2 children's lives happened while their own grandfather, the reigning King of England, was reportedly reduced to birthday cards sent through intermediaries and the occasional scheduled video call. Whatever you personally believe about the choices Harry and Meghan have made since 2020, that specific and irreversible loss belongs to Charles too. And it is genuinely difficult to stay angry at a grandfather managing a serious illness for wanting one afternoon with his grandchildren that he cannot ever get back, regardless of everything else complicating this story. If this breakdown is genuinely giving you more than the surface-level headline version everyone else is running, the like button helps this channel reach more people who are specifically looking for that kind of depth. Hit hit it and stay with me because the timing of all of this deserves serious scrutiny. Of course, plenty of royal watchers are asking a sharper and considerably less sentimental question underneath the emotional one. And it is a genuinely fair question that deserves a straight answer rather than deflection. Why now, specifically? Why this particular week after years of exactly this kind of visit failing to materialize? Harry landed in Britain this week for Invictus Games engagements and walked almost immediately into a high court defeat. His long-running legal fight against the publisher of the Daily Mail dismissed outright, every single claim thrown out by the presiding judge. Reports across the preceding months have consistently described the Sussex finances as considerably tighter than the team publicly acknowledges, with the Netflix output visibly slowing, the entire brand increasingly and uncomfortably dependent on exactly the institution they walked away from 6 years ago with such public fanfare. So when Meghan and the children suddenly appear at Highgrove, mere days after a serious and very public court loss, after a bitter and extended public standoff over security funding, after years of deliberately staying away from British soil entirely, it is entirely fair and not remotely unkind to ask whether this was fundamentally a family reaching for each other, or a brand reaching for relevance at a moment when relevance had become genuinely and measurably scarce. Maybe it is both simultaneously. Families rarely turn out to be only one clean thing, and in this particular family's extensively documented history, neither do comebacks ever arrive uncomplicated. Notice the timing too, because timing inside this specific family has never once actually been an accident, however much everyone involved insists otherwise. Harry did not fly into Britain this week purely and simply for a family reunion. He flew in specifically for Invictus Games events, marking exactly 1 year until the 2027 Birmingham Games, the one cause even his harshest critics inside that palace consistently struggle to attack with any real force, built as it is around wounded veterans rather than headlines about Harry himself. A meeting with his father, tucked quietly at the very edge of a week already dedicated to a cause nobody in public life wants to look petty standing against, is either a genuinely beautiful coincidence or a very carefully and deliberately managed one. Royal families have used exactly this kind of strategic scheduling for the better part of a century now. It does not make the emotion inside that Gloucestershire house any less real for the people actually in the room. It just means that somebody, somewhere chose this particular week with considerable care and forethought. Remember too that this entire reunion almost did not happen at all. Days before Friday, the whole visit was hanging by a thread over the same bitter, very public standoff about Harry's security funding that has followed this family since 2020 and shows no sign of ever fully resolving on its own. For a genuinely uncertain stretch of days this week, Meghan and the children joining Harry in Britain looked entirely unlikely, then briefly and formally cancelled according to every single report circulating at the time, then suddenly and quietly back on again by Friday morning, as if someone somewhere made one final, decisive phone call that changed the entire trajectory of the visit at the very last possible moment. Whatever happened in that gap between unlikely and confirmed, it tells you this reunion was not some easy, obvious plan sailing smoothly toward Highgrove. It was fought for, apparently, right up until the last possible hour by people on both sides of this family who clearly wanted the visit to happen more than they were initially willing to admit out loud to anyone, including possibly themselves. There is a harder question sitting just underneath all of this that a lot of people online have started raising, and I think it deserves real airtime rather than being brushed past in favor of the more comfortable family reunion framing. If Meghan is willing and able to sit across from a king she previously accused, in the most watched interview of the decade, of presiding over serious concerns raised about her son's complexion before he was even born, a king her own husband has since described in a memoir as someone whose choices contributed directly to years of family dysfunction, what does it say that the same willingness to reconcile has apparently not extended to her own father? Thomas Markle has not spoken to his daughter in years. He has, by his own public account, undergone a leg amputation and serious ongoing health complications during that same period of estrangement, without so much as a phone call from the daughter he raised. The question a lot of people are asking is not whether Meghan has the right to manage her own family relationships however she chooses. She obviously does. The question is what it says about the sincerity of a broader reconciliation narrative when forgiveness apparently flows easily toward the family member with institutional power and global visibility, and considerably less easily toward the one who has neither. I do not think that particular question has a clean or comfortable answer, and I am not going to pretend that it does just to wrap this section up neatly. It is entirely possible, and I think genuinely likely, for Harry's reasons for wanting this particular reunion to be completely genuine and emotionally real, while the broader picture surrounding Meghan's own family relationships remains exactly as complicated and unresolved as it has already been for years, with no clear sign of movement in either direction. Both things can be true inside the same family, inside the same week, without contradicting each other in any way that requires resolution before either can be acknowledged. There is another detail sitting quietly underneath this entire story that almost nobody has fully unpacked yet, and I think it deserves more attention than it has received. The family is believed to be staying at Althorpe, the childhood home of Harry's mother, the estate where Diana is buried and where her brother Earl Spencer has spent decades carefully protecting her memory from exactly the kind of public spectacle that has characterized so much of this family's recent history. Of every property in England Harry could have chosen for this particular week, he chose the one that puts his own children within walking distance of a grave he has spent 30 years trying to make some kind of peace with, on his own terms, in his own time. You can call that strategy if you want to. A deliberate choice designed to generate a specific emotional resonance around the visit. You can also call it simply a man quietly trying to give his own children something he lost far too early in his own life, without any calculation attached to it at all. Both things can be true simultaneously, and this particular family has never once made it easy for outside observers to determine with any confidence which explanation is actually the real one, or whether both are operating together in ways that even the people involved might struggle to fully separate. Somewhere inside Kensington Palace right now, there is almost certainly a communications team working very hard to figure out exactly how to spin the king having a quiet family dinner with his own grandchildren into a headline that does not accidentally admit that the future King of England chose a horse over a homecoming on this particular weekend. Good luck to them, genuinely. I would not want that specific job for anything in this world, and I suspect whoever has it is having a considerably harder week than usual. William does not get to react purely as a brother first anymore, and I think this is genuinely the frame that explains his behavior more accurately than simple, uncomplicated resentment ever could on its own. He has to react as the man who will one day decide what shape this entire family takes for the next 50 years, and forgiveness on a personal level does not automatically translate into forgiveness on an institutional one. People close to William insist his coldness here is not really about Archie and Lilibet at all. It is about trust specifically, and trust, once it disappears from a family this public and this thoroughly documented, does not simply return because of one quiet afternoon in Gloucestershire, however genuine that afternoon might have been. But here is the detail that complicates the easy version of this story, the one where William is simply cold and Charles is simply warm. Despite everything, despite the memoir, despite years of near-total public silence between them, William has reportedly never once stopped caring whether Harry is actually safe on British soil. Sources close to him say he still quietly supports the security measures protecting his brother during these visits, even while refusing to be anywhere near the same room as him. Sit with that for a second. A man furious enough to skip his own father's reconciliation dinner, still making sure behind the scenes that his brother does not get hurt walking to his car. That is not the behavior of a man who has stopped loving his brother. That is the behavior of a man who has stopped trusting him, which is a much lonelier and more specific kind of pain than plain anger ever really is. This coldness did not start on Friday either, and understanding exactly where it originated matters considerably for understanding why it has proven so durable and so resistant to a single reconciliation dinner, however genuine that dinner might have been. Long before Meghan ever wore a ring, William was reportedly the brother urging caution, telling Harry he was moving too fast, asking him more than once whether he was truly sure about her and whether he understood how difficult a life with her might genuinely become. Harry has said publicly that those warnings stung at the time, and stung even more in hindsight once events unfolded roughly the way William had worried they might. William is, in this specific reading, the brother who saw something early, said so honestly and directly to Harry's face rather than behind his back, watched it play out close to exactly how he had originally feared it might, and has spent every single year since being quietly and repeatedly told in books and interviews and documentaries that he was wrong to have worried in the first place. British commentators are already fighting openly over what Friday actually meant across every major outlet and every royal-focused platform, and they cannot agree on a single unifying interpretation except that it clearly mattered enormously to everyone involved. One camp is calling it proof that Charles is finally choosing his family over palace politics, a king putting fatherhood above every carefully managed institutional consideration for possibly the first time in his entire reign. The other camp is calling it proof of exactly the opposite. A king so eager to avoid becoming the second monarch in a row remembered primarily for a broken family that he is willing to reward years of public attacks with a private welcome home, regardless of what that signals institutionally. Both camps looked at the exact same 4 careful words from Buckingham Palace and walked away completely convinced they had been proven right. That should tell you something important about how little those 4 words actually explained on their own. And notice, before we close this out, who has quietly been doing the hardest work in all of this? The one person nobody put a camera on at any point this Friday. Catherine is reportedly the one trying, over and over, to hold the peace between her husband and her father-in-law, caught in the middle of 2 men she loves who currently cannot agree on how to handle a third man she used to consider family too. Sources describe her efforts as constant, patient, and, so far, mostly unsuccessful, despite everything she has apparently tried. There is something almost unbearably ordinary about that specific detail sitting inside a story that is otherwise this royal and this heavily documented across every major news outlet. Somewhere in an actual house, a wife is quietly trying to talk her husband down while the rest of the country turns his silence into a national headline. And that is a kind of pressure that no polo match photograph will ever adequately show you. What do you think? Was Friday genuinely the beginning of something real and lasting between Charles and Harry? Or was it a carefully timed moment designed to serve interests on both sides that ultimately have very little to do with actual, sustained reconciliation? And do you think William's position softens at all once he is the one actually wearing the crown and making these decisions himself? Or does trust, once broken this thoroughly and this publicly, simply stay broken regardless of who ends up in charge of the institution? Drop your take in the comments, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one.